Hi, I'm Shivani Gupta, your host on the Passion Institute podcast. Today, I want to talk about the Manager Multiplier and how leaders can unlock engagement in 2025. And this is a really big topic. And what I want to do is encapsulate some of the really key studies that are coming out, whether it's the Gallup's latest report on workplace and engagement, or whether there's a number of other pieces of research, including Harvard Business studies that have come out as well. But one of the things that all these studies are finding, especially in the latest Gallup report, is the fact that managers account for 70% of the engagement outcomes and how the team engages with that particular manager and the organization. So they're that conduit between the organization, between you as the leader or entrepreneur, into what you are trying to achieve and get your staff and your team at all levels of your business to be able to implement. However, the issue is that the research is also showing that only 1 in 3 managers are themselves engaged. So if we've only got a third of our managers engaged, and even those, they need to be able to make sure that they've got the right communication skills to be able to get that information and be that conduit and transfer that across. What chances do we have if 2/3 of our managers are not engaged themselves? Well, the truth of that is that those 2/3 of those managers that are not engaged are not going to be able to deliver the vision, what your objectives are, what your why is, and be able to translate into the actions that they need to do in order to be able to do that. So if you've got a great employee and that employee is able to be a self-starter, doesn't need their manager, then yes, you're going to see those results. But other times, if they're looking for that direction, that connection, that engagement from their team leader or manager, it's not happening. So at best, we've got 1 in 3 chances, and that's a challenge. So I think one of those key actions that comes out for leaders and entrepreneurs is how do we engage our managers more? We need to do more and more and more in the future in terms of being able to engage them. The other issue is obviously that the burnout for managers continues to rise. Every piece of evidence shows us that. And why is that? Well, the workload is high, which means that there might not be enough people, or perhaps things just aren't prioritized very well. So as a leader and entrepreneur, really think about, are you giving very clear priorities to your managers? Are you making sure that their workload is spread out? Most leaders and entrepreneurs that I work with, often we tend to overload our brilliant people because they get stuff done, because they're engaged, because they're passionate, because they put their hand up when you are trying to implement a bunch of things. So we tend to overwork them, and we need to be really careful that those 1 out of 3 that are engaged, that we do not burn them out. And why are the managers leading to burnout? Well, they're kind of squished in when you look at that, and a lot of people talk about the burger, the best parts on the middle in terms of the managers. And so this squeeze between the leadership demands, which might be coming from you as the leader or entrepreneur, but also, between the team's needs. And the teams are having more and more needs, whether it's around flexibility, whether they're asking for pay rises, all the different needs that a team member has. And the bigger their team, often the more those demands are, because, and then they kind of feel like they're being squished from both sides. If there's like the analogy of a vice, that vice is there and the middle managers are feeling like that they're being squished in. The other is that the lines, particularly in the last few years, have become more blurred between when are you on and when are you off. We've obviously got great access to a lot of digital platforms now, but that doesn't always mean that our boundaries between work and life are simpler. Excuse me. I mean, I know that for some of the clients that I speak to, they are finding it more difficult, and they feel like that they kind of almost have to be on. Sometimes when they're cooking dinner, sometimes as soon as they're finished with their family, they can't wait for their kids to be in bed so they can open up their laptop, open up their, whatever digital platform that they're using to be able to check in on how things are actually going. And that always on digital culture is definitely going in the wrong place. It felt like it was going to be a great advantage to us, but now we're finding that unless we have those clear boundaries, we are going to burn out some of our people. So if we want our managers to have that multiplier effect, one of the things that we need to do is to really look at things very differently. The other is that we also risk very high turnover, and that turnover is linked to disengagement and all managers that feel unsupported. So if they don't feel supported by you as a leader or entrepreneur, they're going to disengage. and then we're going to get the flow on or the cascading effect of that into our people as well in terms of what happens. I talk a lot about well-being. I believe that as leaders and entrepreneurs, we have a duty of care to really look at our managers' well-being. If we want them to have this multiplier effect, we really need them to measure what their well-being is at. We need to use some sort of a scoring scale to work out how do we actually do that, make that better. We also know that employees that have got engaged managers are up to 2.5 times more likely to be engaged. So again, we see that flow-on effect that comes in terms of what it is that we can create. And a lot of traditionally, we have promoted managers based on their technical skills. And we go, wow, you're fantastic. You're already achieving really well technically in your role. How do we thank you? How do we reward you? Here you go. Here's a team that you can have. And that doesn't mean that because they're great technically, that their leadership ability is going to be fantastic. And we used to think that that was the old way. And yes, things have improved, but in a lot of businesses I walk into, particularly I specialize between 20 and 200 people, we do tend to keep promoting people generally based on their technical ability. And we want to make sure that A, they're interested in being a manager, but also, even if they are interested in being a manager, are they capable? Doesn't mean they don't get the role, but what training and development and one-on-one coaching or other things have you got in place to make sure that that manager is going to feel comfortable, has the skills and competencies, and is actually going to be able to engage their people, which is the whole point of getting them and stepping them into the manager's role. The other thing that the Gallup research report also finds that there's very little ongoing development of managers. So it's great to send them to something once a year or twice a year, but how do we keep that ongoing? You know, could they do certain courses? Could they have, if they're having one-on-one coaches, rather than doing it in a very small impact, unless that you need them to, pick up on a particular skill very quickly, why not spread that out over 6 months or even 12 months so that they might be better off getting coaching, for example, once a month as a manager with an internal or an external coach, rather than something that's every week or fortnightly, but then it's for a shorter period of time. So, how could you make your dollar stretch a little bit and support those managers for a longer period? And a lot of it is that informal catch up that you as a leader and entrepreneur are doing with your manager, because that's where they feel seen and heard and can bounce some ideas, some challenges off you as well around that. The other thing that the report also shows is that managers still don't know what their number one thing that they need to focus on. It sounds so simple, but this is global research that's telling us that. Now, you might go, that is not an issue for me. Fantastic. But could you get a little bit clearer? Could you get a bit more specific on time? Could you talk a little bit at your weekly or twice a week cadence that you might have with your manager, how you want them to deliver that? Could you coach them and ask them some questions on how they plan to do it and add your experience into that so it helps them accelerate what they're trying to achieve as well? So it's really important, this thing about, do they understand what their number one driver of engagement is? Do you know how to engage them? Do they know how to engage their people? Talk to them about those stuff rather than updates just on projects, etc. as well. And frequent and more meaningful and more informal feedback is constant. So when you see your managers doing something great, even if it's small, even that's what's expected, even that's what they're being paid for, acknowledge them, say thank you. In the book that I wrote, Getting Your People to Step Up, last year, I have a whole chapter on that. Just because so much of the research indicated the same thing, is that as leaders and entrepreneurs, we aren't stopping enough and thanking our people, particularly our managers who are trying to do so many things. Now, most workplaces I walk into have got some sort of hybrid, workplaces. So you might have 4 in 1, 4 in the office, or 3, 2, 2, 3, whatever the format of your hybrid is. But hybrid stuff does make it more complex. It does make it harder for managers to be able to manage which days are on, which days to bring the whole team in. What did they do with that particular day? What if there's resistance and pushback to being able to bring people in on a certain day that may or may not suit the whole team? So how do we actually do that? And that, just even managing all of that, requires new conversation, new communication skills for managers in terms of what it is that we actually ask them to do. And managers need a lot of training at the moment, not just in the metrics, but how to have more empathy, how to have more adaptability, how to have more tougher conversations with their people, because that's what's going to hold them in good stead to be able to manage a variety of things. And I believe that that's very much linked into the well-being of our people, because when our people know how to have tough conversations, then it reduces their stress. When they don't know how to have tough conversations, it increases their stress. So we want to make sure that our, people are there. And as leaders and entrepreneurs, you can talk all about well-being, but unless you actually model the behaviors that you want your people to have, it's not going to work, particularly for the ambitious people. They're going to follow you. A bit like as a parent, I can say whatever I like, but my kids are watching me like a hawk. They're constantly looking at things that I do, not what I say. And as leaders, we need to be aware of the fact that if we're espousing all these things about well-being, share with people what you're doing around your well-being. Share with people how you switch off and you turn off. Share with your people how are you setting boundaries in your personal life so they can learn from you, and then they want to emulate some of the things that they want to do. The other question I get asked a lot is, how do we empower our managers? So how do we get this multiple, manager multiplier? Well, some people are very capable of, empowering. They've got the skills, but they've also got the soft and people skills to be able to do that. But not everybody does. So I always say that it's not about just empowering managers, but you want to kind of prioritize the people that you believe are ready and empowering them to make more decision-making, more delegation, so that the more empowered they feel, the less they have to run by you unless they want to. And they can actually take on some of the decision-making. That might actually also give them the multiplier effect. But people have to be ready for that. I can't empower all my people at the same time because they'll be at different stages of development. And also, to be honest, there are different stages of the trust that I might have with each of them. So you want to be able to measure that according to that. One of the things that every piece of research that I looked at said this. It said, when you invest in your managers, you will absolutely get the ROI, the return on investment on that. You will absolutely increase your retention. You will absolutely increase your performance. And the other thing that was common across everything I read when I started to look at how do we get our managers to multiply things was that organizations and businesses that spend a bit more time and a little bit more resources on well-being see higher profits and they see lower turnovers. They just see that constantly. So one of the things that we've got to do, if we look into the organizations of the future, and especially with so many things coming at us with AI in many, many forms, the question becomes, if you had to take one or two key actions after listening to this podcast, if you want your managers to be able to multiply and achieve more and get your people more engaged, what are some of the things that you're going to do? Even do it deeper, do it wider, do it bigger, or maybe one thing that you're not doing as you listen to some of the ideas that I shared that you might be able to do more. I hope you got some ideas from listening to this. Please let me know that my website, as well as thepassioninstitute.com, is also called Ask Shivani. Ask me any questions. I'd love to be able to answer them. Thanks.